It all began on an ordinary afternoon, one of those when nothing seems capable of breaking the routine. The narrator was sitting on the sofa, still enveloped by the feeling of calm he had been experiencing since his wedding. It was strange. After weeks of rushing around, planning, and tension, it finally seemed that life had stabilized. But then the phone rang. The number on the screen was familiar. The photographer responsible for capturing the most significant day of his life, he imagined it, was just to let him know the photos were ready or to ask for confirmation of some technical detail. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until he answered. On the other end of the line, breathing was rapid. It was as if the man were running or trying to control a growing desperation. "You need to come here now," he said, his voice trembling, each word laden with an urgency that didn't match what should have been just a conversation about wedding photos. The narrator frowned, confused. He tried to joke, to ease the tension. "What's wrong? Did my tie look crooked in all the photos?" But the photographer didn't laugh. In fact, he didn't even seem to hear the attempt at lightness. The pause that followed was long enough to send a shiver down his spine. The photographer took a deep breath before saying, with absolute seriousness, "No, this isn't about focus or color. It's not about editing. It's about who appears behind you." The narrator felt his stomach clench. For a moment he thought he had misunderstood. Perhaps it was a shadow, a lighting effect, a guest he didn't recognize. But something in the photographer's voice made it clear that it wasn't any of that. This wasn't a technical problem. It was something much bigger. "What are you talking about?" he asked. But the answer came tinged with hesitation. The photographer seemed to struggle with his own words, as if what he had seen in the images was so disturbing that even he couldn't explain it. I can't tell you over the phone," he finally said. "Seriously, you need to see it with your own eyes. And you need to come prepared." The word prepared echoed in the narrator's mind like a silent, strong, and heavy warning. What exactly could exist in a wedding photo that required preparation? Who or what could have appeared behind him to the point of causing a professional to panic? The narrator began to sweat profusely. His hands trembled slightly as he held the phone. It was as if his body was reacting even before knowing the truth. The photographer tried to continue, but his voice faltered. "Look, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've dealt with distorted images, I've dealt with shocks, I've seen people appear where they shouldn't. But this is different." The phrase, spoken almost in a whisper, increased the tension even more. The narrator straightened his posture, as if something inside him understood that this moment would mark a turning point in his life. He tried to get more information. Is it someone who shouldn't be there? Someone who came in uninvited? The photographer was silent for a few seconds, a silence more frightening than any answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, heavy with fear. "If I showed you this photo now without preparing you, I don't think your heart could take it." The sentence hit him like a blow. The narrator felt the air catch in his chest. His heart began to beat faster, almost painfully, as if anticipating an impossible revelation. He tried to protest, to say that this was an exaggeration, that a simple image could not cause such a reaction. But deep down, something inside him knew it wasn't an exaggeration. It knew that something was wrong, profoundly wrong. As the photographer urged him to come to the studio immediately, the narrator rose from the sofa, overcome by an anxiety he could barely rationalize. It was as if a shadow had silently crossed his path, and only now had someone noticed. "I'll go," he finally replied, his voice low and steady. But before hanging up, he heard the photographer say, almost as a final warning, "Come alone, and come prepared for everything." The narrator stood there, holding the phone against his chest, trying to understand what had just happened. The room seemed colder. The silence seemed heavier. He felt that, from that phone call onward, nothing in his life would ever be normal again. His marriage, his happiness, the tranquility he believed he had achieved, all of that was now shrouded in a fog of uncertainty. And then, as if it were the perfect closing of a grim warning, the photographer's words echoed again in his mind, stronger, more menacing, more real. He said that if I saw the photo unprepared, my heart wouldn't be able to take it. When the narrator hung up the phone with the photographer, his mind immediately returned to his wedding day, as if his subconscious were trying to find some explanation in the past for what he was about to discover. He had always cherished that day as one of the most precious moments of his life. The sun shone in a clear, limpid sky, the flowers were arranged perfectly, and each guest seemed filled with hope, as if they were witnessing more than a ceremony, but the beginning of a new era. He remembered the laughter, the crossed conversations, the tight hugs that seemed to promise that everything would be all right from then on. The bride was stunning, walking slowly towards him, illuminated by a perfect combination of natural light and emotion. There were tears in the eyes of family members, sincere smiles everywhere. It was a scene worthy of a movie, the kind that makes you believe that love truly can heal what the world has broken. The narrator felt a profound peace in that moment, a sense of security he had never experienced before. It was supposed to be the safest, most beautiful, and most stable day of his entire life, and indeed, it seemed to be. But even on the most perfect days, there are shadows, details so small they go unnoticed, at least at first glance. While the ceremony was taking place, thoughts kept crossing his mind, like tiny arrows of anxiety. He tried to ignore them, but they were there. One example: a distant uncle who always caused tension in the family showed up at the last minute and sat in the last row, observing everything with an indecipherable gaze. The narrator noticed, but preferred to pretend he didn't. After all, he wasn't going to let anyone ruin that day. Another shadow that lingered discreetly was the absence of someone who should have been there, someone important who didn't show up without explanation. The narrator tried to mentally justify it. Perhaps they were ill, perhaps some unforeseen event had arisen, but something about this absence bothered him. It was like a small crack in the perfect glass of that moment. Furthermore, there were family memories that always resurfaced, even when he tried to bury them. Unresolved stories, prolonged silences, secrets that were never fully clarified. The narrator carried all of this with him while smiling for the photos, while holding his bride's hands, while saying his vows. He believed that love would be enough to silence that uncomfortable past, but the past has its own way of resurfacing, even when no one calls it. And then there was that, a detail so subtle that he only noticed it later, mentally reviewing the scene. At various points during the wedding, he had the feeling of being watched, not the affectionate gaze of the guests, nor the emotional gaze of the bride, but something different, a distant, discreet look, as if someone were standing far from the center of the party, simply observing. He remembered glancing quickly behind him, certain that he would find some distracted relative or a guest he didn't know well. But there was no one, or at least no one who caught his attention, and perhaps that detail had always been there, hidden among flowers, laughter, and flashes. Perhaps there was a silent figure in the shadow of the trees or near the door of the hall, someone who shouldn't have been there, someone who hadn't been invited, someone whose face he consciously refused to register. Perhaps it was just imagination, but what if it wasn't? The narrator also recalled something curious. In one of the posed photos, the photographer asked him to adjust slightly to the side, saying there was a strange detail in the background. At the time, he laughed, thinking it might be a guest making a face. But now, with the photographer almost panicking on the phone, that phrase took on a completely different meaning. The narrator found himself wondering, could that detail be the same thing he saw now? Something that went unnoticed by everyone that day, including me? As these thoughts swirled, the memory of the wedding, once so pure and luminous, began to be tinged with shades of doubt. The narrator felt a shiver run down his spine. He didn't know what the photographer had found in the photos, but everything inside him told him it was connected to those little shadows that were always trying to warn him of something. The past has strange ways of hiding in images, and the camera, unlike human eyes, doesn't choose what it wants to see. It records everything, including what shouldn't be there. And then, with a heavy heart, the narrator concluded something that would completely change his understanding of that day. I believed that day had been perfect, but the camera captured something my eyes didn't see. On the way to the studio, the narrator felt the steering wheel slip slightly between his sweaty fingers. His heart was beating so fast that each pulse seemed to echo inside his own head. He tried to stay calm, repeating to himself that perhaps it was just a misunderstanding, a technical error, a strange coincidence that the photographer had exaggerated. But the closer he got to the address, the more he realized that his body didn't believe any of those explanations. The air seemed heavier, each traffic light took longer than usual, and anxiety built up like a wave about to break. When he parked in front of the studio, his legs almost gave way as he got out of the car. The place, which normally exuded professionalism and tranquility, now seemed to harbor something the world shouldn't see. The narrator hesitated for a few seconds before the glass door, observing the yellowish light that escaped through the cracks. He took a deep breath and went inside. The photographer was inside, but he wasn't the same confident and relaxed man he'd met on the day of the ceremony. Now he paced nervously, running his hand through his hair as if carrying a weight he didn't know how to distribute. When he saw the narrator, he stopped abruptly, as if trying to gather courage. His eyes were slightly widened, his expression tense. "You came quickly," he said, his voice hoarse. The narrator tried to smile, but the gesture died. "On the way. You left me no choice. What happened?" The photographer didn't answer immediately. Instead, he picked up a black folder from the table, but the way he held it, hesitantly, almost reverently, made it clear that this wasn't just a collection of photos. It was as if he were about to reveal a forbidden secret, something so disturbing that even he, accustomed to handling images of all kinds, was afraid to face it again. "I need you to prepare yourself," he said softly, "because what you're about to see here shouldn't exist." He opened the folder slowly. Very slowly. Pages slid out with a slight dragging sound, revealing a large, crisp, flawless print. A photograph from the wedding. The narrator recognized it immediately. It was the image of him and his wife posing in front of the arch of white flowers. A perfect moment. The couple smiling, their hands intertwined, the guests blurred in the background with expressions of joy. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until the photographer raised his finger and pointed to the bottom corner of the image. "Look here," he murmured. In the background, partially hidden between two guests, was a figure, not an ordinary guest, but someone standing completely still, face turned directly at the camera, eyes fixed, expression neutral, or perhaps somber. It didn't fit the setting. It didn't fit the moment. It didn't fit with anything that should have been there. The narrator felt his body go cold. The blood drained from his face. He moved closer to the paper, unable to look away. And that's when the recognition came, like a punch to the gut. He knew that person. Or rather, I knew that person's story. It was someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone whose name the family avoided mentioning. Someone who had been missing for years. Or, depending on the version told to the narrator when he was still a child, someone who had died a long time ago. "That's impossible," she whispered. He can't. The voice trailed off in the shock. The narrator took 2 steps back, his mind spinning. It was impossible, irrational, but there it was, looking straight at me. The photographer swallowed hard. "I thought it was some kind of lighting trick. I swear I tried to explain it that way." He pulled out another photo, and another, and another. He placed them all on the table, spreading them out carefully, like someone displaying evidence of a mysterious crime. In each of them, the figure appeared in some corner, sometimes partially visible, sometimes obscured by the crowd, sometimes reflected in a glass as if observing from afar. In some, the face was out of focus. In others, it was frighteningly clear, especially in those closer to the end of the party. The narrator noticed something even more disturbing. The figure seemed to be getting closer and closer. In the first photo, from a distance. On Monday, a few steps forward. In the third one, almost behind the narrator, as if she were walking slowly towards him, invisible to everyone present. "I didn't tamper with those images," the photographer stated, raising his hands as if he needed to prove his innocence. "And there's something else. In the photos I took before the ceremony started, that person doesn't appear. In the photos at the end, she's right next to you, almost touching your shoulder." The narrator felt an overwhelming weight on his chest. It made no sense. It didn't align with logic, with reality, with anything that could be explained. His mind desperately searched for a reason, a justification, but found only fear. Pure, absolute, growing fear. "Why?" he asked, almost voiceless. "Why would he be at my wedding? How is that possible?" The photographer stared at the narrator with a tired, defeated look, like someone who had spent hours trying to understand the same thing. "I don't know," he said, "but there's something you need to hear." He took a deep breath before finishing. "It appears in several photos, and it's always closer." After seeing the photos, the narrator left the studio stunned, as if ripped from his own reality. He got into his car but remained there for long minutes, his hands on the steering wheel and his breath trembling. The figure in the photo, the impossible presence, the direct gaze at the camera. All of this hammered in his head like a silent warning that some part of his history, his family's history, had been hidden from him all his life. And now, finally, it was coming to light, even if in a distorted, mysterious, and disturbing way. His first reaction was to deny it. Deny what you saw, denying what he felt, to deny what one has acknowledged. But the image was etched into his mind with cruel clarity. It was him, or at least, he looked exactly like him. Someone who shouldn't be alive, or someone who, according to his family, no longer existed. Since childhood, the narrator had grown up hearing vague, incomplete stories about a distant relative, an older brother, perhaps a cousin, someone the family always described as a closed case. Whenever he asked about this person, he received curt answers, evasive glances, or abrupt changes of subject. Over time, he learned not to bring up the subject again. But now that figure was in their wedding photos, and she seemed closer and closer. The narrator decided he needed to pursue the truth, even if it meant awakening ghosts his family had tried to bury his entire life. He began by talking to his mother. She opened the door with a welcoming smile, but that smile vanished when he showed her one of the photos. Her face stiffened, as if she had received an electric shock. Her eyes filled with a profound panic, a panic that didn't stem from what she was seeing, but from what it meant. She tried to hide her despair, but her voice trembled as she asked, "Where did you get this?" And there, in that slight tremor, the narrator realized something inevitable. His mother knew exactly who that person was. He pressed him. "Tell me the truth. Who is he? Why was he at my wedding? And why have you always hidden this from me?" The mother looked away, ran a hand across her forehead, and began to cry silently. After long minutes of hesitation, she confessed that there was indeed someone in the family who had been erased from history, someone whose name should never be spoken again. She recounted a fragmented version, full of old pains, a young man who had become involved with dangerous people, who had put the family at risk, and who, after a serious incident, had been sent away. "He never came back," she said, "and we decided to move on." But that version didn't add up. He didn't explain his presence in the photos. He didn't explain why he was looking directly at the camera. It didn't explain the fact that he was getting closer in each image. The narrator sensed that his mother was hiding something even bigger, something she couldn't or wouldn't say, so he sought out other relatives. He spoke with uncles, cousins, people he hadn't seen in years. Each told a different story, contradictory versions that only increased his feeling that there was a much deeper truth hidden beneath layers upon layers of family silence. It was only when he spoke to a great uncle, the only one who didn't try to hide his discomfort, that the truth began to become clear. The man couldn't look the narrator in the eye, but he recounted that the missing relative hadn't left of his own accord. He had vanished, literally, without a trace, without goodbyes. The family believed they were dealing with a kidnapping, or something equally sinister. After months of fruitless searching, they decided to declare him dead, not for confirmation, but out of despair. But the most shocking part came at the end. The last place he was seen was at a wedding, his grandmother's wedding. He appears in a corner of the photos, always watching, always in the shadows. The narrator felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Now everything made sense, and at the same time nothing did. The figure that had appeared at his grandmother's wedding was now at his own wedding, decades later, looking exactly the same, as if time hadn't passed for him. It was impossible, irrational, but it was there. And then a new hypothesis flashed through the narrator's mind like a lightning bolt. What if he had never left? What if he had been alive all this time? What if he was silently observing the family without revealing himself? Or worse, what if someone, or something, was using his image to get closer? The possibilities were terrifying. The narrator realized he needed to confront what he had been trying to avoid from the very beginning. He needed to go back to the most recent wedding photos. He needed to look again at the last image, the one in which the photographer claimed the figure was almost touching his shoulder. And when she looked, she felt her legs give way. The figure was so close it seemed part of him, the hand outstretched, almost touching his clothes, the gaze cold and fixed, as if about to say something, as if wanting to be seen, finally seen, after years living in the shadows of his family. And at that moment, the narrator understood something that would forever change his relationship with the past. The photo didn't destroy my marriage, but he revealed what no one had the courage to tell me. If this story has captivated you this far, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me continue bringing you real stories, full of mystery and truth. And comment below, what would you do if you found something like this in your wedding photos?